I feel like there are so many little ways we can stretch what we have, whether it's to save money, live more simply, or just be a bit more self sufficient. A lot of these things might seem hard and time consuming at first, but once they become part of your rhythm, they really just make sense. And for me, it's important that we don't sacrifice health along the way. So I'm not going to tell you to grab the cheapest ultra processed thing at the store just because it saves a few cents. Sure, palm oil is cheaper than butter, but well, we all know what's the problem with that. I'm lucky to still have both my grandmothers, and growing up around them, watching how they cooked and how they lived, taught me a lot about making the most of what you already have. So, in this video, I'm going to walk you through 10 things I do to live a little more frugally, but without giving up the things that matter. The first one, as you might have guessed, is to bake your own bread products. This one took me a while to build up to, but at this point I make most of our bread products from scratch. So I'm talking about bread, tortillas, dinner rolls, flatbreads, that kind of thing. It's hard to give general advice because we're all starting from different places. Some of you are baking everything from freshly milled flour, and some of you are just grabbing what looks good at the store, and that's totally fine. I think the best thing you can do is to be honest with yourself about the season you're in. Like, if you're 1 week postpartum, you're probably not going to dive into sourdough with fresh milled flour, and that's okay. Uh, but personally, I'm a big advocate for sourdough. I baked with yeast for a while before trying it. I was kind of afraid of sourdough actually. But once it got popular, I thought, okay, if this many people are successfully doing it, I can at least give it a shot. And now I honestly find sourdough easier to fit into my routine than I did yeasted bread. But regardless of whether you're into yeast or sourdough or neither yet, I'd just encourage you to start and start small. If your family eats a lot of sandwiches, try Googling the easiest sandwich bread recipe and give that a shot. If you already bake with yeast, maybe try sourdough sometimes. Just go step by step, and you might be surprised where you'll find yourself after a few months. Most of the points in this video are going to be about food or cooking, but this next one isn't. But I just had to include it anyways because it can make such a big difference when it comes to saving money. And it's turning down the heat in your house, especially during the colder seasons. It might sound small, but it really adds up. Of course, it depends where you live, but I'm assuming most of you are somewhere with cooler and warmer seasons, not with extreme weather year round. And these days, it's become so normal to keep the temperature indoors the same all the time. So we heat our houses in the winter, we blast AC in the summer, and there's maybe just a few degrees of a difference between seasons in our houses, really. But I actually learned to appreciate when the inside of my house reflects the seasons. So when it's cold out, I'll pull out the thick sweaters and big blankets. I'm not going to sit in a freezing house, obviously, but I also don't mind being a little cold. It's a great excuse to bake some more, get a cup of cocoa, bundle up on the couch, and not that long ago, at least in my country, that was just normal. My husband told me that when he was a baby, it got so cold in the house in the winter that they put him to bed with mittens on. And that was just how things were, and nobody really questioned it. And I think we've lost some of that. And maybe it's worth revisiting just a little. Looking at my stand mixer before in the video reminded me of another point, and that is buy cheap, buy twice. And in my country, we actually have a very similar saying. It goes, I'm not rich enough to buy cheap things. And it means exactly that. If you go for the cheaper, short-term option, you'll probably spend more money in the long run, either on repairs or replacing it altogether. I remember when I bought my first mixer, I was so proud of getting it for a great price, but it turned out to be pretty terrible. I think it broke down like 13 times before I finally gave up and bought a Bosch stand mixer. I don't know if it's easy to get in the US, I know it is in Europe, but it's their most basic model and it works beautifully. I've had it for at least 5 years now and it still runs exactly like it did when I got it. So, especially if I'm buying something more serious like kitchen equipment or something that I know gets a lot of use, I'm not afraid to spend a bit more. I really believe that eating what's in season and grown locally is one of the easiest ways to eat well without overspending, because seasonal food is usually cheaper, fresher, and just makes more sense. And very closely tied to seasonal eating is making traditional dishes, because they also contain just what people had on hand. They weren't created by picking whatever looked good on a grocery store shelf. They came from using what was growing around them. So, for example, we don't have chickens, but our in laws do, so we get a lot of eggs from them. And that means I'm always looking for new ways to use eggs. They're free for us and they're packed with nutrition, so why not? One of my go to meals for that is pasta carbonara. I think that might actually be the third time I'm showing it, but it's just such a great example of a simple, seasonal, and frugal meal. When I was in high school, I stayed with a family in England and I noticed something really interesting. When they said salads, they usually meant a full meal, and that was new to me. Like their salad had chicken, cheese, maybe some nuts, and I realized how different that is from where I live. Of course, you can order a salad at a restaurant here as well, but at home, we don't really treat salads like a main dish. And that brings me to the next point. If you have little veggies available or at least nothing really within your budget, make a big salad and keep it very simple. We eat a lot of green salads, just different types of leafy greens depending on the season, and those are quite easy to grow as well. Some salad greens are really resilient and do well in colder months, and other are more delicate and thrive in spring or summer. So we really just pick whatever is in season. And it's very normal to have a big bowl of green salad in the middle of the table here, and everyone just takes a few forkfuls along with the main meal. One of my favorite ones is actually cabbage with boiled potatoes. That might sound strange, but if you roughly cut up some boiled potatoes and toss them with raw cabbage while they're still hot, they soften the cabbage and create mashed potato cabbage salad situation. It sounds strange, but it's really good. But the main idea is having a bowl of something fresh on the table can be a really easy way to get vegetables in without spending extra time or money making elaborate side dishes. And if you are in the mood for some cooked veggies, just roasting them in the oven on a baking tray has to be my favorite way to make them. It's especially great if you want to make a bigger batch all at once. When I turn the oven on, I usually chop up enough for 2 or 3 trays of different vegetables I have on hand, and then I'll serve some of them with the meal I'm making that day and then save the rest in the fridge for the days ahead. You probably saw this one coming, but next up is canning and preserving. It's such a good way to make whatever produce is abundant in the season, make something out of it, and stretch it so you have it for the rest of the year. I'm still dabbling in preserving, so aside from fermenting a few things, I really didn't do much, but I'm very lucky to have two grandmothers and a mother in law who all can things regularly. So the things I find most practical are homemade tomato sauce and paprikash. Paprikash is just onions, peppers, and tomatoes, sauteed, cooked down, and then canned. You can then heat it up and crack a few eggs into it or use it as a quick pasta sauce. I love adding canned tuna for a bit of protein, and you can have a great meal that way. So, canning and preserving is definitely a skill, and I'll be honest, it's something I'm still figuring out. So, for now, I'm mostly sticking to simple ferments. If you're in the same situation or just thinking about starting, I really recommend starting with homemade sauerkraut. So, that's just fermented cabbage. That's actually what I'm showing you here. But for this batch, I bought some young cabbage and I didn't know this at the time, but once I shredded it and squeezed out all the liquid, I ended up with way less than I expected. Usually, I do 1 can of cabbage per mason jar and I use about a tablespoon of salt for that. But this time, my jar was only halfway full and I didn't have any more cabbage. So I did what most of us modern humans do when we don't have our grandmas in the kitchen to tell us what to do. I asked ChatGPT and it suggested adding shredded carrots, which seemed reasonable. So I did that and I'll let you know how it turned out. The next thing on the list is foraging. So for teas, mushrooms, and herbs to cook with. And this is still very much part of the culture where I live. Now, I wasn't interested in any of this when I was a teen. Of course, foraging was fun when I was little, but later it just seemed kind of old fashioned and boring, something that old people do. But now I'm getting into it again. I hope it doesn't mean I'm that old. But I'd say it's almost a lost skill. So if you have any older relatives who know what grows in your area, ask them while you can. For me, I found that I really love elderflower. You can make the most delicious syrup from the flowers. You've probably heard of the more popular elderberry syrup, which you make from the fruit, and that one is supposed to have more health benefits. But personally, I think the flower syrup just tastes better, so we are doing that this year. But there's so much you can gather around you. Different mushrooms, an obvious thing, and nettles are everywhere where I live, and they make a great tea, and they are full of minerals. And even if you're not going to run around foraging everything wild, just growing a few herbs can go a long way. And you don't even need a big garden for that. There are so many ways to grow herbs on a balcony or even just on a windowsill. While we're talking about traditional skills, I think one that's really worth learning is to cook the less popular cuts of meat. These days, everyone reaches for chicken breasts or a nice cut of beef, but my grandmothers knew how to make any cut taste good. And if nothing else, they just threw it in a stew and let it simmer all day, and the result was always tender and flavorful, even if it started as a bad cut. Then there are organ meats, which can also be delicious if you know how to prepare them. You've probably heard of people taking beef liver capsules now, but honestly, my grandma's version of beef liver is even better. When I was pregnant, I actually had to be careful not to eat too much of it just because they can be very high in vitamin A, but that's just how good they are. She would freeze the liver for a couple of hours first to make it easier to slice it super thin. Then she'd saute a big pile of onions, toss in the thin strips of liver, and let it cook for just a few minutes, just until the meat was cooked through. Then she'd season it with lots of salt and pepper and serve it with mashed potatoes, and it still is so delicious, and probably better than anything in capsule form, to be honest. So, yeah, don't be afraid of those undesirable cuts of meat and organ meats. If you learn to cook them right, they can be just as good, if not better, than the expensive ones. And here's just a totally random tip to end with. If you mix your salad with your hands instead of a fork or spoon, it just mixes so much better. Obviously, this is only if you're making it for your own family. Probably not the most hygienic thing to do if you're bringing salad to a big gathering. But if you're making it for your family, I'd say it's totally fine. And that's it for today's video. I hope you got some ideas, maybe felt a little bit inspired, maybe learned something new. I'm ending this with a clip of two little kittens that were born at my in-laws' farm last weekend, and they were just too cute not to share. But if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more of what we're up to, and I hope to see you next Friday. Bye!